So I will call to order our special meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission for Monday, March 2nd, 2020 at 7 o'clock here. This is a special meeting to discuss and go through some potential Scribner errors or other things that have kind of come up through staff questions as we're kind of working in the new zoning regulations and ensuring that folks understand all of their pieces and parts. So thank you, Chris, for compiling the one-pager, which we'll kind of go through today on the potential Scribner's errors. And then the only other item we had was approval of the minutes from November 4th, our last regular meeting. So, Chris, should we dive in, folks? Anyone have?
Sure. Yeah.
Without objection. We'll take them in the order that you presented them to us, Chris, and feel free to kind of walk us through and or give context of how these various ones came up. But the first one on your list is section 5.15, page 92, on outdoor lighting.
Mm-hmm. Somebody actually called and wanted to know what the lighting requirements were in A and B, and I looked and said, we don't have any. But we do in all the other residential districts, and I thought that might have been a Scribner's error, because historically we'd always, especially in terms of like tennis courts, when they went in, we're always looking at lighting and not having it trespass onto the, adjoining properties and whatnot. But, so it's a question.
So I will preface most of this with, since I wasn't here when the sausage was made, I will be looking to the folks to my right and left for if this came up during the discussions or the like.
I don't recall it coming up, nor can I imagine a rationale for
excluding
A and B.
I agree with both of those points. I don't remember discussing it, and I don't know why they'd be excluded.
Well, so the only thing that, and for me coming completely out of the blue on this, I looked at the luminaire types on page 93, that sort of things that were allowed and not allowed. That one on the right with no cutoff angle seemed to be like most houses have a light with a post, or a post light on a post like that, or many houses do. That was the only thing I could see that in your traditional housing residential lighting, you occasionally do some things that you wouldn't want to have in larger scale or more commercial operations.
Sorry, I agree.
Is it sports center?
There's something important happened.
Does anybody in town have a tennis court that's lit?
We have several
A
Yes,
private tennis.
Private tennis courts.
And when they came in, we were always checking their light.
Yeah, I understand, but would it but I'm thinking, does 515 give us the ability to restrict on residential?
Well, it doesn't, right? Because
It only does it in downtown in the T3, C, D, and BB.
No, I understand, if we put in, but if you put in A and B,
Right.
are we giving them more rights than they used to have? Is what
No,
I'm- Okay.
Because we're still talking about, the lighting. And I don't know if we have, I'm just looking to see if we have it in the table.
Did the former regulations contain any provision with regard to lighting in A and B?
It didn't. We didn't have any provisions for lighting, and so that's why you were incorporating something regarding lighting.
And what I'm thinking
this
of-
is all restrictive, right, Alan? Isn't this all restrictive language in this?
Yeah,
entire-
but for instance, the foot candle standard for exterior lighting, would that prevent any lighting or in a residential area? I don't know, my problem is, I have no idea what the hell foot candles mean. I never did, okay? So I don't know how bright it is.
Well, typically, when we would do the tennis courts, because that's the only thing I can
Yeah.
relate to, they would give us a light photometric schedule, and then they would show us where the lights were, what type of lighting, whether it was cut off or shielded or whatever it was. And so then what was gonna happen behind it, so that it was demonstrating that everything was focusing down and
Yeah,
in.
I understand, but does this give them more rights than we had is what I'm concerned about? Where they could where they didn't have to worry about that, that's all.
And you know what, something's coming to mind. Look at section D, okay? Didn't we discuss holiday lights, Alan, with lasers and blinking lights and so forth? Does that ring a bell in your memory? And I thought that someone brought up, well,
Well,
you
we
couldn't
say
have.
traditional seasonal lighting is exempt from this
Oh,
prohibition.
where's that?
That's
in
only
D3.
flashing and blinking lights.
In three,
Oh, okay.
D3,
Oh, I see, okay.
I don't,
And floodlighting is prohibited as well.
And don't a lot of people use floodlights around their house?
they use them everywhere, including
Just
in
about
T3 and
everywhere,
TC, you know, CD. And
So,
So, I mean, to me, it should either be all the residential districts, or it shouldn't be any of them.
But
And then we just check with tennis courts and do our normal lighting drill with tennis courts.
is there a specific provision on tennis courts?
I haven't hunted that far. I don't think so, but we could add one in. But since we don't normally see tennis courts down in 3D or BB,
oh yeah, they
because
just
there's
don't
not
have the
physically
room.
enough space, it doesn't apply right now anyway.
Right, but we don't have a section on if you wanted to
On
put in a
tennis
tennis
courts,
court.
Well,
no,
there is something about tennis courts, I think. That's fencing.
yeah.
It's with fencing we have something.
Should we, delete D4?
If it's restricted to business areas, then probably not.
I guess I even have a definitional code. What is floodlighting? How would you define?
I don't think we define it.
A very bright light aimed at something.
No, it's not.
No,
It's
that would be a
completely
spotlight.
It's completely diffused. A
It's
floodlight
spread
is-
out over
is
a-
spread out over
over
a
a
wide
large area.
area.
Oh.
It gives-
I would think that would be necessary for safety
Yeah.
In parking
purposes
areas.
of parking lots in the business zones particularly. Plus, it's what goes on in my backyard every time a deer walks through.
I don't. I'm almost wondering if the floodlighting that they're talking about is the old-fashioned floodlighting with the big floodlights that, you
Big
know, when you
cleat
would
lights
have
or
a sale, they would flash, you know, rather than a floodlight like you see on your house.
Oh, I don't know, but more to the point, if it's something that is so ambiguous, it shouldn't be included.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, I'm
gonna
just
cause
looking
some-
at, well, actually, that's a searchlight.
Yeah, that
The
more is
operation of
like D2,
searchlights.
the
Yeah.
searchlights.
So I have no idea what floodlighting is. This was something that came in from Hamden, so.
Well, if you look above, they specifically say lighting fixtures for building security or aesthetics in any display purpose shall be accepted, meaning it's okay. Except there will be full cutoff, fully shielded, recessed, and the height that shall not exceed 18 feet.
So that's in essence saying for your security parking lights, they need to really be focused down
Down.
on the ground as with a cutoff angle. Probably similar to what's in the diagram below. So the options are to either add all residential to this or remove the residential
Exactly.
from this. Are the the residential zones that are in here, they tend to be zones that might have mixed use though, right?
No.
No, they're only
No, they're
residential.
just residential.
Well-
They're just residential.
A can have synagogues, can have schools.
But A's not in here.
No, but he's talking about residential.
Yeah,
A
but the
residential.
three
I thought
that
you were
are in
talking
here
about
are
A
strictly residential.
I guess I'm talking
Oh,
about,
the residential in here.
That are
Which
current-
three are those?
C, D, and BB.
so T3C, T3D, and
And
T3BB.
T3BB.
I'd say to the extent that these restrictions apply to C, D, and BB, they should apply to A and B as well.
So adding A and B in to have all residential follow these basic standards.
And I'll make a motion to amend section 5.15 to add A and B.
Motion, do I hear a second?
I second that.
Thank you. There's been motion and a second. Any further discussion,
No,
comments? Then I'll entertain a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? We shall add residential A and B to section 5.15. Thank you.
Okay. So
table
the ne-
5.3.
So the next one that comes up regards manufactured homes. And this came up because you may or may not have been following what was going on down at the Historical Society. But at one point, they were proposing to have a trailer-type home there while they wanted to build a regular house. And they had engaged the services of an attorney who was saying that our regs said that we allowed them. And so what he was referencing to was the flood section, where we do reference to manufactured homes, but we don't reference to them anywhere else. Typically, we'd been saying if we didn't mention them, then they were prohibited, but
That's
that
state
wasn't,
language.
what the kickback that we were getting was that, oh, no, you allow them, and so that's why it's here. So the question to you is, should at some point we consider because this isn't a Scribner's error in a sense, this is more of a, if we go to do an amendment sometime, should we consider adding something specifically in saying that that type of housing isn't allowed?
That's state language, right? Isn't the flood language
The
from
flood,
state?
it's not state, it's FEMA, it's national.
Okay.
So that has to be the way it is, we can't change that.
Sure.
And they do have, obviously concerns for having those types of structures in a flood area because they can lift and float and whatnot. We historically have not, the town historically has not had, trailer homes, even temporary in the case of when there was a fire in a house where somebody was using it to live in on the site while their house was being reconstructed, have never allowed them, so.
We allow temporary trailers at schools when they're doing construction?
Those are, when we
They're
have a
not
large,
living.
when we have a large project, and it's a construction office trailer, we've used them, but not for residential use.
But we've allowed, but there have been trailers for classrooms. Have there been? I think there's,
Historically, I believe there are.
There
They
may
have
have,
some up
there
at
may
the-
have
that-
been, yeah.
the middle school, I know. I don't know
If it's on town-owned property, the town can exempt itself from its regs.
I never do. Question. I'm just looking at the definition of, first of all, manufactured homes. And the way I read that, a modular home would come within that.
Yeah. So that was gonna be one of my questions as well. There are
We
prefabricated.
do have a couple of modular
Oh,
homes. and-
modular homes you can get that are, $500,000 and up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, no,
They ain't cheap.
we have one on Newton.
The
I
industry's
can-
changed. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
it's
just
totally
some-
changed.
Yeah,
These-
Right.
Yeah.
They're not cheap,
Yeah.
some of these. They're custom jobs. And the way I read this manufactured home, a modular home would come within it.
A structure transportable in one or more sections.
Sections which is built on a permanent, permanent foundation. It says with or without a permanent foundation, except is built on a permanent chassis.
That might be the,
That's the way they get it, yeah, and is designed for use with or without, okay. I get.
we do have a section that deals with park trailers and travel trailers and RVs on page 39 in the storage, commercial vehicle storage.
Yeah, they keep
Right,
that.
but those
Yeah.
have always been applied to camp trailers and,
Yeah, and
trailer
that's the
trailer.
fencing, the area, is that fencing?
No, I think it's when you're allowed to have them.
it's
how long you're
outside,
allowed to have
outside
them.
storage.
Okay,
Storage.
outside storage.
So, but in the prior versions, have there been prohibitions on trailer parks?
It was never recognized, so if, by default, if it wasn't an allowed use, it was prohibited. But because the question arose and we didn't have a specific section to be able to just point to and say, no, we don't allow them anywhere, because the language in that 11.5D prohibits them in areas of special flood hazard, but the question was, does that then allow it in areas outside of it? On 118, and
Yeah.
it's still in that flood hazard.
So in essence, you use section 3.2 on page 18, that
3.2,
all other uses hereby prohibited unless
Right.
specifically permitted.
but then in the flood hazard one on 118, it says manufactured homes are expressly prohibited in any areas of special flood hazard within the town of Woodbridge. So,
So
does
what's-
that mean by default that it's not prohibited?
Why wouldn't it be,
That's what the argument
okay,
that was.
the question I ask is, why would, if it is, you're talking about a trailer or mobile home or something like that, that is permanent, as opposed to less than 180 days.
Right, the intent to use, the one that they wanted to use was gonna be more than 180 days, because you can't build a house in 180 days.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to have it used as a home
Yeah, until the
until
house
they
was
built the
finished.
other one, and, if you can do one in 6 months, you're doing good.
Okay, but it was a temporary structure.
It was still gonna be a
Wha-
temporary.
Why wouldn't it be considered a temporary structure?
You can't have a temporary structure unless you have a primary use, and the primary use is the house.
You mean it's like a catch-22?
Right.
I mean, personally, I have no problems, temporary structure until the permanent structure is completed. And obviously, if it takes more than 180 days, I personally have no problem with that. But,
But
So we can have them come back to the commission if they'd like to have it for longer.
the whole thing is moot at this stage of the game. But the question was brought up, so I'm bringing it to you.
yes.
And this is not a Scribner's error, this is a
This
gap
isn't,
in
this is a question, is it a gap? Do we automatically prohibit them because we don't because all we say is single, in 3 is single family. Well, I suppose. I guess we could back into using the tables, because the tables say that you're supposed to have at a minimum 1,000 square feet in all the residential districts except for A, which requires 1,200, and you're not gonna have a trailer that's gonna have that much.
No, you will not have that.
Even a double?
I don't even know if
Double wide.
I mean, I don't know, but I don't think 1,200, you know.
It would be 100 by 20 or 30 by 40 or double wide you might get there.
1,200?
So, but the narrow question is, do we want to, when we go to, you have a running list of potential formal amendments
Right.
that we would have to
Well,
do.
I'm starting one because we haven't gotten any there yet, but
Would we want to add a specific, clear prohibition saying that trailer parks or trailer?
or
homes-
conversely, you know, do you want to also consider, you know, if there's a fire? I mean, we just had a fire this past weekend where the house is basically, you know, destroyed.
Allow it
And
until the
allow it while
permit
it's under,
construct, regardless.
I mean, some people want to take advantage of that and some people don't because it's just a small space depending on the size of the family and everything else. But it's an option that people might want to have.
I would have no problems putting it in as a temporary structure.
Other reactions?
So I would agree with Alan's point of view. So that's not something that can be resolved tonight through the
No,
resolution.
no, it would
This
be
is
an
more of a
amendment.
policy amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I think you're getting the sense of us that a policy amendment would make sense, that would clarify the
So I'll start that list, yeah.
the general trailer, permanent sort of trailers as a standalone only. A trailer is not allowed, but as a temporary structure in the event of a loss of the main home for that period of time it would take to replace the main home, that might be allowed.
And a potential policy discussion regarding the difference between trailers and mobile homes and manufactured homes.
Well, it does say
But-
chassis, and so that,
Sufficiently limiting,
yeah, I mean,
okay.
a modular home ain't built on a chassis.
I think if we are making this new section, we will define
Yeah,
Yeah,
what it is as
Okay,
well. We can
that's
use
what I
that
was-
language probably to
Yeah.
start with, but
Okay.
make clear that it's not the $500,000, Swedish
Modular
made,
home.
IKEA home, which are now real things.
okay.
Right.
So that takes care of that one.
All right, thank you. Next up are additions to existing buildings, page 64, E2.
So this was just a question where now, and you can do this, you can take and be able to allow someone to do something without it having to go to the zoning board of appeals for a variance. So prior to now, anytime somebody went to do an addition to any of the business-oriented districts, and it was falling within a required setback, they had to go to the zoning board of appeals. And now it's in there where they can ask you to vary the regulations, and you've given yourselves the ability to do that. So I'm just,
I think this was something that was specifically discussed. And I think the answer to the last question is yes.
so if you deny it, then they could go to
Yes.
ZBA.
Okay.
Okay. So that's, that one, that was a short discussion.
well, I don't think we could ever stop them from going to the zoning, the ZBA.
But their first stop would have
Yeah,
to be here.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
but if
They'd
we
have
deny
to
it,
exhaust you and then go.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
they always have the right to go to the ZBA after we deny.
Someone can bring anything to the ZBA, right? The Board of Appeals, right?
Well,
Well,
it has to be
we have
within
to-
its jurisdiction.
We have to do something, don't we?
Yeah, somebody, yeah, they always have to have something that they're not complying with,
Right.
so. All right.
So that doesn't need a resolution or a
That,
change?
Nope.
that's
That
just
stays-
clarification for me, so that's great.
Perfect.
Um,
Page 38, motor
this one's a
vehicle
simple
use.
one, I think it's just supposed to be NN instead of LL. This is in D, because the outdoor storage is actually on page 55 is NN, not LL,
Fine.
okay?
Yeah.
So
There
that's
was, LL was storage reserved for future use.
I have no idea why we had, that was a,
And then
Not
there's
going
NN is outside storage.
right.
Is
So-
that for like inside storage, like a storage
It
U-Haul
came from
storage.
Hamden, I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I'm not seeing where this is.
That
Oh,
is a cross-reference to
page
page
38.
55.
It's within the body of the regulation.
So 38D.
D, it's D, and if you see it's a
Right.
reference to
Oh,
three
A
LL.
cross-reference, and that's on page 55. And it refers to an empty, LL is empty on page 55,
Okay,
but NN is the appropriate one.
okay.
So for this one, because it is a Scribner's error, do I entertain a motion to change the reference to section 3
Move.
dot, thank you,
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The LL should be NN.
Yep.
Thank you.
As long as you're on page or close to 55, you can flip over to 56. And in A, I think it's at the very end of that first paragraph in A, it says shall be allowed except for the following. And I think it's supposed to be shall not be allowed except for the following. But I'll let you read it and then you tell me.
Did this one come up in a context?
Yeah.
I feel like it's the spelling bee. Can you use it in a sentence?
We have, we've had some things coming in and out of the office, and so sometimes I look at stuff and it's like, oh, wait a minute. So in this case, I think it no, it's outside storage, because we've been dealing with sending out letters regarding outside storage.
So while folks are still reading, what confused me when I first read that is the beginning of A says where storage or display is otherwise permitted by these regulations. Then it goes into these things shall be allowed. And that's what was confusing to me.
Well, that's why I think
That's
it's
terribly confusing.
where
Just
storage
read it.
is otherwise permitted, the outside storage or display of materials, objects, or things shall not be allowed except for, because when you read the things that it's allowing to be stored outside, it's
Yes, it
it's
should be
common
shall not-
sense stuff.
It should be shall not be allowed,
Right.
Except for,
except for the following.
yeah.
I agree, but I just am curious,
It-
what storage or display is otherwise permitted?
Those.
This is all dealing with the business districts, so.
It's clear here.
So it goes
Yeah.
on in B. B talks about that you can have some storage outside,
Okay.
so
So
you have
I-
to read the rest of it to,
So that does look like a Scribner's error, that this should read instead that it shall not be allowed except for the following reasonable things. So do I have a motion
So moved.
and a second?
Second to add the word not.
To add the word not. Any discussion? No, hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We've added the word shall not be allowed to part 3.3 NN 2.a. Thank you.
alphabet soup letters. Now this is a stickier one, the density one. 69, and this relates to an application that you may or may not see for taking a lot that had one house in the section residential D, and then taking down the house and then building 2 new houses. So the question, we were trying to figure out how much parking they needed, and it referred us to this table 5.5, but I couldn't find the right 5.5 that did what we needed it to do relative to parking.
And there are 2 table 5.5s.
And there are 2 table
different
5.5s,
pages.
neither of which help me.
I started trying to piece this together and gave up. Because is there anywhere that does actually give the parking requirements in the text for each of the?
I think it was
zones?
in one of the prior
That we took out.
things that we had that we took out.
I'd have to go back to the, no, I don't even have the earlier verdict.
I have them, I can go back.
Go back because
And find that old table,
we
and then,
need something that summarizes the parking requirements for each zone if we have it.
so I'll go back and see if I can find it,
Yeah.
and then I'll scan it and send it to you guys, how's that?
Fine.
Okay, but that would need to then be, that's more than a Scribner's error to, I think, add.
It may be, yeah.
The other question I had in just
Well,
figuring out how to read this,
would it be, because we just accidentally dropped it?
Dropped it, yeah.
It was in an earlier, and we just accidentally dropped it, would that be a Scribner's error? I don't know. Go find out.
what does table 4.2,
Shared parking.
yeah, how does that actually work? It would take whatever the effective parking, or it would be an adjustment to that table of parking requirements?
Yeah,
So for your example of a residential, 2 residential sharing parking, is that possible?
normally it's not gonna work, because you're gonna have people home at this. Normally, the way that, the shared parking was supposed to work was if you had one use that was, you know, if you had residential upstairs and then you had office or retail downstairs, you could have shared parking, because when the people were home was typically at night, and then they would leave to go to work, and then the office and the other would be there. But it doesn't work with residential, because everybody residential is there at the same time. And
I don't get that at all. Table 4.2, how does that, how do those factors work?
So if yours was the residential and office example, that would be a factor of 1.4. How does that then?
You have to have 1.4 parking spaces minimum, right?
no, but you can't have a fourth of a
Yeah,
parking
that- I
space,
just
so you
don't-
have
On
to, you have to
page-
round up.
Is that in the rules?
Yeah, well, yeah, the only reference to the shared parking factor is in B, HB. Parking requirements shall be adjusted according to the shared parking factor to determine the effective parking. Effective parking is, I think, a defined term. At least it should be if it's. No, it's not. Why did we use then capital effective parking? Let me go to annual parking.
So another item for cleanup is the fact that we still have 2 table 5.5s
Right.
and figuring out
Where they actually should reference.
and what which sections correctly reference the 2 different, one being required queue spaces, which sounds like it's spaces for you to line up for something.
Yes,
Okay.
so like a drive-through or bank, Starbucks.
Or take out food, okay. And the other 5.5 was parking aisle widths. So that might just need a different number. Because the parking aisle width on page 96 seems to only really be referred to by that section 6 on parking aisles. So this one requires some additional homework to find the old version of the table?
You know, when I look at D, yeah, I gotta find the old one. On page 97, it talks about drive-through window service and queue space, see figures 5.3 and 5.4. That's 5.3 and 5.4. And it doesn't reference to table 5.5,
In part D2A,
D2A.
the bottom
Oh,
right-hand
okay,
corner of
so
the
it does,
page.
okay,
Yeah.
so we're okay there, so we need that.
Although figures 5.3 and 5.4, I'm not sure are what they're,
That's table 5.5 on page 99.
They're trying to show you that the drive-through should be at the back, not at the front. In that figure 5.4,
okay. But 5.3 is about a gas station.
yeah. Well, they're locating the pumps at the back of the building, so again, the drive-through is at the back, not in the front.
Okay.
Okay. So we still have to find a 5.5. But the 5.5 on page 96 is parking aisle width.
So there doesn't seem to be a table 5.4.
That should be 5.4.
Okay, so a simple
So
script.
the parking aisle width should be part,
Yeah,
Yeah,
because the
on page
only table
96.
before it is 5.3 on the candle foots.
And 5.2 is on page 91, and 5.1 is on
So
page
I'll
90.
move that we make that 5.4.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? So table 5.5 on page 96 shall be renamed table 5.4.
And I still have to find you a what will then become 5.6, I guess. But we'll figure out where it goes. All right,
Okay. And so we'll save the actual table that we're looking for
for
on
another.
summarizing the parking requirements to a later
Stay
date.
tuned. We'll continue that.
Thank you. Next up is the community garden on page 19.
I thought it was interesting that, the Regional Water Authority contacted me about developing another community garden on some of their fields just south of Lake Dawson. And they said, is that an allowed use? And so I looked at the table for community gardens and said, no. Because we only list them for, whatever we list it for. Page 19.
Looks like,
We only list them for the C, D, and BBs. So I think it's a Scribner. I think it's supposed to be an A and B, especially since the community garden up here is an A.
Agreed.
Yeah, but the community garden here on A happens to be town-owned land, isn't it?
Yeah.
So have they exempted themselves from the regs for that piece of property?
No,
I
it
don't
was
know.
never an issue. I mean,
I understand, I don't know.
I don't think so.
Okay.
That was, the community garden was before I came, so.
why is it in T2 as well and Dev 2?
I don't know.
Is there an existing one in either of those?
I
Other
think the
small
thought,
community
well,
gardens?
no, that's not a T3. That's two.
Define a community garden for me.
Oh, we have a
Did we define it?
33A1. A community garden is clear of rubble and contamination, has access to water, has an area for compost, and a storage area for tools and trash receptacles.
Yeah, if you put that in, depending upon, somebody wants to start a community garden in an A resident, in A, with houses around, his neighbors may be objecting to it because of the traffic it can cause, as example, or other things. I'm just raising.
And where was that definition? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's on page 22 in A, under agriculture.
Because it doesn't say what the size has to be.
All right.
And I was looking at
But it would be worse down in the C, the Ds, and the BBs, because those are tighter
I don't know
spaces.
why we have it to begin with, so.
and T2 is rural or
T2 is Fitzgerald. Oh, well, then we allow it in T2. So
right? Do we allow them on these
we allow it,
community open space plans?
we allow it at Beecher Road School. We allow it at Fitzgerald. We allow it at the Amity High School.
So that one looks like it's intentional.
Well, those are the T2s. We never had T2 before. That's new. And we also allow it up at the recycling center up on Acorn Hill. And the side of where the Camp Whiting is on the west side of Litchfield Turnpike across from the Darling House. That's T2.
But but all of them are.
So that's one place that we allow it, along with B, C, or
Yeah.
C, D, VB, and Dev 2 for some reason.
And where's Dev 2?
Dev 2's on the east side of the West River, so over where animal control is, down to where the ball field is.
Okay. So this gets back to the question, do we really want it in residential A and B?
It seems a
Right.
little bit more like a policy question than it does a mistake. I don't think of it as a Scribner's error, correct?
Yeah.
Well, originally, when we had the Fitzgerald thing, it wasn't called out as its own zone. And it had a community garden there before it was T2.
But I guess the question, should the dog area, the community garden, not be zoned residential? Should it actually be in this T2 zone, which seems to be taking these town-owned properties that are different,
When we created the new zoning map, we split out T1s and T2s.
but did not include the walking?
It's shown as a T2.
No. So then I'm confused. So isn't it allowed?
It is allowed, but my question was, based on the water company asking if they could use fields downslope of the dam of Lake Dawson, which is in residential A,
Gotcha.
and when you read community gardens, why did we exclude A and B, which have larger tracts of land, but allow it in small tracts of land like C, D, and BB, where realistically, it's never gonna happen?
Well, maybe people that live in zones A and B don't want community gardens in there.
I don't think anybody thought about it.
No, I'm sure nobody thought about it. The issue is this an amendment or just a Scribner's error?
And
That's
it's,
the
and I'm raising it, the question.
Yeah. I think it's leaning more towards amendment or.
Okay.
I think it's a policy issue
Yeah.
that we should all think about and go through that.
agree.
Yeah.
Or you could always make a special exception.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do it by special exception, and then you'd have a public hearing, you could look at traffic and all that other
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So that would be a
But-
policy.
Yeah,
Right, but that's a policy, that's not a Scribner's error.
That's not a Scribner's error.
But that might be an
Yeah.
elegant solution to
Right.
those.
Yeah, that's what I would probably be in favor of that approach, but no, for the agenda tonight, it's not a mistake or a
Yeah.
Scribner's error, yeah.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
that
And
is
then,
now on
when
your
we look
list.
at that, we can also look at where we've allowing it currently, and we
Exactly.
need to
Right.
probably just throw it all under
Throw
that.
it all and make it all special exception, I agree,
Yeah.
totally.
Okay,
Except maybe the T2, which is the ones that are town owned, basically. But we can figure that out,
we
thank
can
you.
figure that one out. Okay.
92.
So on to fences on page 92.
I added in pages just to make it easier for us
No,
to follow.
super helpful.
I had stickies on mine.
I don't remember, is this, the fences and walls, a new provision, or was it a carryover from the?
We never dealt with fences or walls. Fences were always exempt from zoning, except for fences that were on the intersections of roads where you had a very specific sight line that had to be preserved.
It is interesting just looking at sections 5.13, 5.14, 5.15, where we already were just at the beginning. None of these have residential A and B in them. They all start with zones T1, T2.
Hmm.
We've now added residential A and B to the lighting section in 5.15. And I do recall, at least I have scribbling in my book, that we, I think, talked about fences and walls over 6 feet and deer fencing, et cetera.
In residential.
We were talking about it in the context of
Ca-
residential,
ca-
but
yeah, I know.
missed the fact that residential wasn't
We talked, I remember
in the
talking
list.
about that.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of highlighting, all these sections have a similar, or these 3 sections at least have a similar flow to them.
Do we currently have, aren't there houses around, particularly walls of any type located within the first 25 feet shall not exceed 4 feet in height? There are houses that have walls over 4 feet in height in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they're all over the place.
Yeah. More often than not, they're on main roads.
Yes,
Right.
totally agree, totally understand that. But it would violate that section.
Yeah.
It would prohibit.
But it would prohibit that.
Wait a second, this doesn't make sense. Unless I'm reading it wrong, B, sub B says front can't be over 4 feet in height, and side and rear can't be over 6 feet in height, excluding deer fencing. Is that the way it reads? Required
Right.
side and year. And then it says in D, fences or walls over 6 feet out high shall conform. By definition, you can't have anything over 6 feet.
Right. So D's at odds with B.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. First, you're saying you can't exceed, and then you're saying if you do exceed, then it has to be an accessory structure.
I feel like we talked about this last time, too. I think you may have actually pointed that out.
I don't
The
know.
last, I feel a
It was
deja
so,
vu moment.
it was so long ago, I don't remember.
I think it was a question of, the question at that point was whether or not you could have a fence over 6 feet in height because you had the two sections.
That were in conflict.
So I think I have to go back and see when
Yeah.
we discussed that and what we said. So you want to hold off on that
Yes.
one?
Can we resolve this question, though, whether this should apply to residential A and B as well?
My initial reaction is it's more of a policy issue. I would imagine there are an awful lot of there are a bunch of places in town, maybe I'm wrong, where side and rear yards are over, side yards particularly, are over 6 feet high. I mean, because that's where it would be. It would be-
There's one that I can think of, and there's one in a front yard that I can think of, where they need, because under the building code, if they're over 6 feet in height, then you need a building permit because of wind load.
Hmm.
And so I know of two that got building permits where they're over 6 feet in height. One is a side yard fence and one is a front
Front
yard
fence.
fence. The front yard fence is the one on the corner of Woodside and Ansonia. There's a residence there when you turn into Woodside, Woodfield, sorry. Yeah, Woodfield. When you turn in towards the old country club of Woodridge, there's a fence on the house to the right in the front. It's over 8 feet high.
Yeah, a couple, along the main roads, I know
Yeah,
people have fences or,
and I think the one that's right on the curve of Amity is higher than 6
4
feet
feet.
too.
Well, in the
Yeah.
front,
Well,
over
it's definitely
4.
higher than 4 feet.
Yeah,
There's
but
two
there-
in there that are higher than,
I can think of a couple that are over 4 feet on the front.
yeah,
I don't know what they have on the side or back.
yeah. So you wanna hold off on that section?
I would.
Think about it some more?
Hmm.
Okay.
Is that everyone comfortable with holding off?
Yeah,
Right.
I'd rather do that than make a quick
And I
decision.
think, Chris, to the extent that you can find the notes from
Yeah, I'll find the notes and
Go.
see what we
my
chatted
vague
about.
recollection from months
Yeah,
ago
no.
that we may have been on this.
Well, I have in mind a period after structures,
Yeah, where we got rid of that last.
where we got rid and shall
Conform.
conform to a relevant, yeah. I know we did that,
Okay.
so we did discuss this.
But we
it's-
taught, it was relative to the height, not to the use
Yeah.
in the A and B.
And I don't know if we figured out whether B and D are inconsistent.
I don't know.
So I'll hunt and I'll let you know.
Okay. Liquor establishments.
Okay,
This was the one that started all the liquor establishments, right?
yeah, this is the one. So when you look at the table, we allow them in Dev 2, we don't allow them in Dev 1, but we do have them in Dev 1. And so.
And they're there now, right?
Yeah, Saloon has a liquor permit, and that's why we went to include Dev 1, because they came in under the old regs and asked for an amendment to allow restaurant with liquor licenses in Dev 1. And so we did approve that, so that's a carryover from the old regs that we had. So I think it's a Scribner
Yeah.
where it says Dev 2, it should be Dev 1, especially since when you read the other sections, they talk about Dev 1, and they don't talk
Yeah.
about Dev 2.
Agreed.
But then, I think it's more a policy question for you. Under the regs, it says that you can operate in Dev 1, a beer, under a beer license, but not under a beer and brew pub license. And so this was the question that I put out there, where I think this is more of a policy thing that you may want to consider. They've talked about possibly purchasing the piece on the south side of Bradley, which was part of the Woodbridge Village Estates, and moving their brewery operation there, and then also having a restaurant and whatnot. But I don't know if they would, operate the restaurant separate from the brewery. Would the brewery need the brew pub license as well as the restaurant having a liquor license? So, it's a question. And then the other, I guess it's not in here, but I should also mention, at one point we had, somebody who was interested in another location, but then they had some odds with the, owner of the property, where they wanted to do a distillery. And, it's not anything that's in our regs. I don't know that you need it in your regs or want it in your regs, but it's just something, if you're gonna consider this, that you might wanna consider that too.
So those are 3 issues, right? Could we
There are
just talk
2
about
issues.
2 issues?
The distillery, the brew pub, and the Dev 1, and I think
Yeah,
it's a
and-
Scribner that it says Dev 2. And
Well, I think that's easy.
Yeah.
But the issue is also, if you do allow it, do they have the restrictions with respect to how close they can be to,
Under the current regs, when you look at beer and restaurants in Dev 1, they're excluded from them.
agreed? But if you're gonna consider a distillery, do you want to exclude them? And if it's a brew
Yeah.
pub, do you want to exclude them?
Yeah, so I mean, it's something for
Yeah,
you to think
That's
about.
policy issues.
Yeah.
Those are policy issues. Again, for your list, if we're doing other amendments. But the narrow question of the table and the Scribner's error that it should be the liquor establishments should be by special exception in Dev 1, not Dev 2.
Yeah, that's kind of clear.
Okay. Do I see a motion?
Move.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Thank you. Any opposed, any abstentions? So that minor change that is now Dev 1 is a special exception in the table. The other issues, I think, are worthy of further policy discussion. And they sound like one question is whether distilleries of liquor should be added to the manufacture
And
of
that's
beer.
purely up to you. It's just something that's been raised this
Yeah.
way, and I bring it to your attention.
No, I'm just highlighting for your list. So
Yep, no, I got that.
That is one, and then the other is,
Brew pub in Dev 1.
Brew pub.
Community gardens as a special exception. And, what was the other one?
great. Did we make it through the list?
Yeah.
Yes, you did. Oh, and then we were talking about manufactured homes as another policy thing. Okay. So I'll make that running list and go from there.
Okay.
All right, can I just make just a general recommendation? When we print the zoning laws again,
I was gonna ask you, yeah, I can do that.
no, when you do it, at the bottom of the page, of each page, and I know this is there should be something like what section you're talking about, because some of these sections, like 3.3 or whatever, goes on for pages and pages and pages, and you have no idea what the section number is
When you're up to GG.
Yeah, you have no idea what the
Yeah,
section
that's
number
true.
is.
I could do it as a header,
or whatever, it doesn't make it, but something on the page, at the bottom of the page, to let you know where you are in that section.
Okay,
Or better yet, which section it is. Because you go to
Yeah.
58, yeah, I just took one, page 38 is, you have no idea what the section number is.
yeah,
You know it's Z, but I don't know what section it is. So if you're gonna cite it, you have no idea.
yeah. You have to go back 9 pages and
Yeah,
hope you
go
didn't miss
hunt
one.
back and try to find what section. That's all.
So thank you for those. The only other item on our agenda was the minutes from our November 4th. Did folks have a chance to take a quick look at those?
I read them, they looked okay to me. I had one question, 4 Ages Distillery, did they come back on December 2nd?
No, that's,
So that was the one
that was
that
the
got
distillery that went
withdrawn,
away.
right?
Yep,
That's what happened with that, right? Okay.
they withdrew.
They withdrew, okay, understood, yeah. I read these, they looked okay to me, I didn't see anything.
Just. Yeah, so I'll have a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve.
Second. Any further discussion, edits, changes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Any abstentions? No. The minutes are approved. Great.
Now we get to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. Thanks for adjusting and spending some time in the weeds tonight. It is and Chris, it is appreciated your efforts they were well laid out and easy to follow.
Thank you, Chris.